en gros de notre parent et de mieux utiliser l'argent des contribuables. It's a vital step forward in our plan to meet the needs of the public today, which means bringing government into the 21st century. We're seizing this moment to deliver government programs and services with unprecedented speed and convenience. Because in the midst of a global pandemic, one thing is for certain: the world has changed and government must change with it. Thank you. I'll now invite Minister Fedeli to say a few words.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Premier and our ministers. Pri-Med is a great example of an Ontario company that stepped up and demonstrated the best of the Ontario spirit in the fight against COVID-19. They are part of an innovation and technology ecosystem that will make the solutions of tomorrow a reality today. That is why the Ontario Made program is so important. Just a few short months ago, we teamed up with the Canadian manufacturers and exporters to launch the Ontario Made program. We unveiled the Ontario Made label and put the call out to our world-class manufacturers to get involved in the program. And to have Pri-Med join Ontario Made and use the Ontario Made label is indeed a credit to this program. Through Supply Ontario and the ongoing work of the Ontario Together program, we will further encourage domestic production for the goods we buy, creating good jobs and growing our economy right here at home. It will create greater opportunities for Ontario businesses to bid for Ontario government projects.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Tory, this morning in an interview, you were talking about the possibility of further restrictions for capacity for retail settings. I just know since then there has been a lot of interest in the retail sector contacting your office. Can you clarify what exactly it is that you're looking for? What settings are continuing to be an issue there? Specifically, is this malls or small shops, and when would these be even considered to come into effect?
Well, I put it forward.
When would we even have an announcement on that?
I put that forward when you were pressing, as you are now, for details on things that we've talked about. We've talked about a whole bunch of things, and on the expert advice of our medical officer of health, who's done such an excellent job presenting us with the kinds of things that are going to help to reduce contact between people. And so I put it forward as a hypothetical example, and you know, I might be in trouble with somebody for doing that in the context of what we're trying to do to have a kind of a rational discussion between governments, between regions, you know, with business and others, just about kind of what's practical here. But it was an example given that just goes like this. If you have a store, if you have a mall, and you have, you know, basically unlimited numbers of people who can go in those premises, and I should say many stores and others have adopted their own protocols with respect to lineups outside and this kind of thing. But, you know, there was more of that taking place in the spring that is taking place now. And so it leads to more things that could be described as a crowd scene. And crowd scenes are not good for restraining the spread of this virus. And so it's an example of something you could do to limit the capacity, as we've done in other instances, of the number of people that could be in a store at a given point in time and that sort of thing. But it's entirely at this point hypothetical, because those discussions are ongoing, and they're the different kinds of measures that basically cut down on crowd scenes and scenes where people are in close contact with one another, especially in an indoor setting.
Okay, thank you. We'll go next to Dave Ryder from the Toronto Star. Dave, go ahead.
Hi there. Following on Matthew's question, I guess to Dr. Davila, given that I think there's a sort of anecdotal talk that when people are out shopping, they're often like moving around quickly, and we've seen lots of stores limiting number of people. Is that actual a source? It seems like compared to weddings, where, as I understand it, there is no hard cap, it's just a capacity limit, that there is an obvious demonstrated problem with infections. I haven't heard of a lot from retail. Is that actually a problem?
So, David, I think you're quite right that there are certain circumstances that we know give rise to increased risk of COVID-19 spread. You heard me mention today in my remarks one of the circumstances that you talked about, gatherings for celebratory events like weddings and funerals. We know that that has been a problem, not only here, but in fact throughout the world. It's those kinds of situations that we need to look at, amongst many others. What are the kinds of circumstances in which people are prone to want to gather together, particularly in closed spaces and for prolonged periods of time? These are the circumstances that give rise to that risk for spread of COVID-19, and those are the kinds of circumstances that we need to consider as we make our decisions. Of course, it's also the kind of thing that people themselves at an individual or household level can reflect on and consider, and to think about how best to limit the likelihood that they become the next source of infection by making the good choices and adopting the measures of self-protection that we've talked about so many times here at this table and at lots of other tables as well.
Thank you. And my follow-up is an enforcement question for Chief Pegg, and I'll double barrel it if I can. Number one, just that about 10% of restaurants, it sounds like, that were checked in the entertainment district had some problem. Is that alarming to you? And can you tell if that was major problems? And number two, did we see any religious gatherings related to Diwali? Any action taken on that as happened in Brampton?
Thanks, David. So first question, I would, like we said, about 9 or so % is what we have seen or what we have experienced with respect to non-compliance. I think first and foremost, our goal is 0%. We're looking to get to the point where we don't have anyone or any business that's operating contrary to the requirements of the public health regulations and COVID-19 related orders. But having said that, I think I would say heartened by the fact that translates, like I said, about 91 or so %. What we saw with respect to restaurants were about 50%, or I should say the violations that resulted in enforcement action on the part of, by way of ticket, were for indoor dining operations that were non-compliant. So hard for me to judge that on a scale as to whether I consider it serious. I would say I do consider it serious, and that is really drawn out of the expertise and advice that's provided by Dr. Davila with respect to the opportunity for spread. The second question relating to Diwali and the religious, other religious type and celebrations this weekend, I'm not aware of any significant issues that were experienced here. Obviously, I'm not on that front line, but in the updates I've received over the course of the weekend and in our strategic command team meeting this morning, that was not a predominant issue dealt with by our enforcement teams this weekend. So I'm very pleased about that.
And I think, David, in order to be fair to our friends that were celebrating Diwali, even Mayor Brown, and you may want to check with him on this, said that they had some very large number of places of worship in the that were celebrating Diwali on the weekend, and all but one, I think he said, had been compliant. So I don't, because we don't want to, suggest that there was widespread, non-compliance even there. I heard him saying that, and he said it on our mayor's call today. So you may want to check with him on that. In addition to us not having any reported incidents of that happening in Toronto. Some of the major mandirs, I know from talking to the leaders of the faith and asking them to help us with this, actually were closed, and people just didn't go at all. They celebrated at home.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll go next to Brian Passafume from the Toronto Sun. Go ahead, Brian. Unmute yourself, Brian. There you go.
There, did that work?
Yes,
okay.
you're on. Go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry about that. Threw me there. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you had a great weekend. Question for Dr. Davila. For the past few press conferences, you've remarked that previous public health measures like the 28-day stage 2 rollback had a measurable positive impact, but overall case numbers suggest the opposite, each day seemingly setting a new record. Can Dr. Davila explain exactly what metrics are being used to determine this success and why they aren't being used as a primary measurement of how the city's doing instead of just strictly case numbers, hospitalizations, and deaths?
So Brian, as I tried to make clear in my remarks, there are a number of measures that actually demonstrate, or indicators that demonstrate that public health measures have made a difference. Whether you're looking at case rates per 100,000 for neighborhoods, particularly where there's a preponderance of bars and restaurants, and what the case rates were like in those neighborhoods before the measures were put into place and what happened after the measures came into force, you can see significant drops in those case rates. As well, when we look at the kinds of studies that we're doing in partnership with other universities and research partners, like the one I referred to in the remarks, a modeling study done in partnership with our colleagues at York University, we can actually see a drop in respect of the number of contacts per person from the period of time immediately following when we moved to the so-called stage 3 reopening to when we reverted back to at that time the modified stage 2 in around October the 10th. So these are just a few examples. I gave a few other examples last week as well. So this is just to give a flavor of the fact that yes, there is a difference when public health measures are put into place. And fundamentally, we know that the way to reduce COVID-19 spread is to actually reduce contact, face-to-face, close contact with other people. The more we are able to drop those contacts, the better off we will be in respect of COVID-19 spread and all the consequences that come thereafter, whether it has to do with illness that then leads to hospitalization, whether it has to do with circumstances and outbreaks in long-term care homes, whether it means that our children are getting sick within our school systems. We're trying to keep our schools up and running. We know that the more community spread there is, the more challenging it is for our hospitals, for our long-term care homes, for our schools. And so the kind of data that I've been talking about for the last few days is to give people the sense that actually when you take these measures and when each and every one of us actually partakes in those measures of self-protection and really goes out of our way to limit our interactions with people with whom we don't live, we can make a difference. We do see the drop in COVID-19 spread, and we will be a healthier community for that.
Okay, my second question, a little bit of a different line here. I'm not too sure exactly who the best person is to answer this, but we've had some readers report receiving tickets for failing to display residential parking permits, despite the city reporting that COVID-19 delays and manufacturers have delayed the passes from being mailed out. These are people who are on automatic renewal programs, and many didn't even get their April passes because of the COVID-19 delays. And they were originally told, and I believe if you go to the website, it says that enforcement is on hold. Is this something the city is aware of, and what advice would you have for people who end up with tickets that clearly aren't warranted?
I will just undertake to look into it. As you know, there have been changes that we made during the course of the pandemic, especially in the early stages when there were a lot more people that were leaving their cars at home during the day because they weren't going to work, and therefore it created problems, obviously, with the way the system normally operates. And my understanding was that we'd gone back to more of the normal kind of circumstance, but if there are problems, of course, with permits being issued because of our own operations at the City Hall, then people shouldn't be penalized for that. So I will check into that and perhaps have an answer we can give directly to you, probably by the end of the day, if not first thing tomorrow.
Well, in fact, we have Barbara Gray on the line from Transportation Services. Barbara, can you add to this at all?
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. That's exactly right. We did suspend operations for some time at the beginning of the pandemic, and we are back to normal. We've started reissuing passes. I believe we started back up again in July, and there is enforcement that has started to happen again. If people feel like they've not received their passes or they've not been treated fairly, then if they contact 311, we'll certainly look into that and get back to them promptly.
Thank you, Barbara. We'll go next to Holly Mackenzie-Sutter from the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Holly. Just have to unmute yourself, Holly. Holly, you there? Just click on mute on your computer, please. Okay, we'll come back to you, Holly. Next up is Jason Chapman from 640 News. Jason, you there?
Yeah, hi guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Okay, great. Oh, there's Holly, guys. If you want to go to Holly
We'll
first,
come
that's
back
fine
to you,
with me.
Holly. Go ahead, Jason.
Okay.
Great. Guys, I just want to talk to you about, of course, my dog started barking right now. I want to talk to you about close confinement areas in the city that I'm not sure have been addressed recently. There are so many pictures floating around of TTC buses and streetcars and subways that are full. The restaurants have been closed because of close contact, and I just see these pictures more and more, and I just want to ask about these full streetcars. Are people at risk as much as they would be in a restaurant if they board a TTC bus or streetcar or subway that's full and distancing isn't possible? And what should be done about it?
So, Jason, first let's address the question of risk. First and foremost, we know that for a number of people, particularly those who are essential workers, that public transit is their primary way by which they get back, get to work and home from work. So this is clearly an important service, and of course we need our essential services to continue. The other issue, though, in respect of risk is that, it is generally a shorter period of time during which you're on public transit. And for the time that you are on public transit, you can wear a mask, whereas within the context of a bar or restaurant, just given the nature of the activity, eating and drinking, you can't really wear a mask. And you are in much closer contact, speaking to people, without a mask, so there's much more opportunity for COVID-19 to spread in those circumstances. So, and I think finally the other point I would make is that where possible, employers and employees themselves are encouraged as much as possible to try to shift travel times. And again, I realize that this isn't always possible in every circumstance, but where it is, shifting times to where there is not where the buses or the streetcars or the subways are not as busy would be another way to reduce risk. But certainly risk within public transit is definitely reduced compared to what you would see in a restaurant or bar where you have a lot of close contact without a mask, and within the context of certain bars and restaurants, alcohol consumption on top of that. So that's just a little bit of a sense as to the risk differential.
Brad, is anybody on from the TTC today?
No, there isn't, but
Okay, well, it's fine then, because I'll just comment on this, Jason. The fact is that we have some challenges that are on particular bus routes that have been well documented, and we've applied substantial additional bus resources to those routes, but they are an ongoing challenge. But I would say that with respect to the overall levels of ridership, with respect to, say, the subway and streetcars, they're still running in the kind of 30% range in terms of the ridership as per normal, as against normal. And so, we're watching this whole issue every day and talking about it repeatedly with one another and trying to allocate, resources where they can be allocated. But the overall ridership is still, well below 40%. And the problems that have been identified have been more on some bus routes, which has been acknowledged, and we're trying to apply extra resources to that as opposed to a broader problem with streetcars and subways. I'm sure with occasional exceptions, but I think the rule is generally that if there's a challenge, it's on certain bus routes at certain times.
And just a quick follow-up, guys. It's in the same vein as Dave Ryder and Matthew Bingley's questions, but I'm not, if you write our stories and suggest that you're considering restrictions on how many people are allowed into a Costco or a Loblaws or these stores where we see people very close together. You've seen the pictures at Costco where people have been elbow to elbow, they've been packed. Would we be wrong to say limits on the amount of stores are being considered? And then if you can address what will happen in the coldest months where people have to queue outside of those establishments, I'd just be curious on thoughts around that as well.
So without getting into great detail, certainly, we are discussing, as you've heard us say earlier this afternoon, those circumstances and situations and how best to effect measures that reduce the likelihood that people congregate within closed spaces in close contact with each other, and especially doing activities where it's difficult to wear a mask or to maintain physical distancing. These are the kinds of considerations that we're actively discussing, things that we're looking at. I'm not really prepared at this stage to get into further detail than that, but really it is just a question of looking at those circumstances where congregates or crowds tend to form, where people get into close contact with each other and in closed spaces. We know that those are the circumstances that give rise to COVID-19 spread. The other piece, as you've heard me say before, is of course asking our public to really think about limiting their contact as much as possible, staying at home as much as possible, reducing close contacts with everyone outside of the people that they live with, in order to reduce COVID-19 spread. And we know that when we take these actions together, that which government can do to reduce the likelihood that people are finding themselves in circumstances where they're in closed spaces, in close contact, and in crowds, and for people to actually take the actions to avoid those kinds of settings. That's, I think, how we get to the greatest success until such time as we are able to rely more on vaccines and treatments to help us get through this pandemic.
Okay, thank you. And certainly Jason Stewart-Green from the TTC could help you on any specific details you have regarding transit. Okay, we'll go back to Holly Mackenzie Sutter from the Canadian Press. Holly, go ahead, please.
Hello, a question here for Dr. Davila. Just on the kind of repeated message about personal responsibility and personal actions that can change the trend. As you just said today, people are getting sick at work on their lunches and commutes, and or people in long-term care when they actually don't have any choice about exposing themselves. So I'm wondering how or if these further measures are going to look at how to make workplaces or these common spaces safer for employees, rather than limiting consumers going in and out when we don't really even know if customers and I guess the front-facing side of the businesses is what's actually driving the spread.
So I think, Holly, there are a number of different things. We've talked, and you've heard me speak at length this afternoon and on previous days around restrictions and measures that can be put into place to limit the likelihood that people congregate in close contact with each other. But there are also, supportive measures or measures that can be done to enhance protections that are in place. So amongst the instructions, for example, that I have put out there to businesses and workplaces include such things as, making sure that they really carefully review their heating and ventilation systems and whatever filtration systems they have to make sure that those are in good working order. Because good working order HVAC systems, as they're known, actually can be helpful. There are some studies that demonstrate that. We've also asked for businesses and workplaces to think about such things as how, might they be able to introduce things like compliance officers, actually assigning somebody and designating somebody within the workplace to ensure that rules and the kinds of measures that have been taken within workplaces are actually being followed appropriately. These are the kinds of things and supports that can be done within the context of businesses and workplaces. On a broader level, we are always in the realm of public health talking about the social determinants of health and recognizing that those access to social determinants of health and addressing health inequities is another core fundamental. So it is a combination of restrictions, if you will, so as to limit the opportunities for people to gather in closed spaces in close contact with each other, and as well supports that I think will give us the best chance at success as we seek to reduce COVID-19 in our community.
Brad, may I just mention one more? And it was discussed by the regional mayors today and chairs when we got together for our weekly meeting. There are people going to work today in this city and outside of Toronto who are maybe having symptoms but are afraid to go and get tested because they're afraid if they test positive they will lose their paycheck and their family will have no means of support because they've either concluded that the existing government programs don't apply to them and or they can't count on support from their employers necessarily. And so we indicated today, the mayors and chairs did, that we believe there needs to be an urgent discussion among between and among the different governments and the private sector with respect to being able to have these people confident that they can go and get tested and should go and get tested without fear of losing their paycheck and not being able to provide for their families. And I think that's a discussion we should have sooner than later, much sooner.
Follow-up question, Holly?
Thanks. And yeah, follow-up. I mean, I have quite a few, but I guess I'm wondering if you can say when people can expect to hear about these new measures, and if the mayor could maybe elaborate on what, like, are you asking for kind of universal paid sick leave, or would that be something that city supports?
If you're asking about the other mayors, it's very interesting because if you read the statement, it says, it's a collective statement we all issue each week. We understand that further public health action may be needed in response to the rising numbers and based on public health advice. The provincial framework allows for this to be done as local circumstances dictate. And we had a very good discussion today, but the circumstances are different in all parts of this broader region. You know, Halton and Durham and Peel and Toronto and York are all different from each other, but there was a consensus that people should put forward what they think is best for their own region. And so that is part of a process that has been responsible for discussions back and forth between different health units and between the health units and the province over the course of the weekend. And that whole process continues. So I guess it will be more dependent on the outcome of all of that, recognizing, and Dr. Davila may wish to comment on this, that you know, the best, most effective orders, just based on legislative jurisdiction and so on, come from the province, but that obviously cities like Toronto and other regions and municipalities have their own ability to do some of these things if called upon to do so.
Did you want to add something, Doctor?
No, I think the mayor is quite right. There is some advantage, clearly, and we've seen that over the course of the pandemic. There is certainly advantage to having the province take on actions at a provincial level or to take on actions on, at a regional level as well. There's no question. From a communications perspective, that's also easier, but clearly the framework does allow for us at the local level to take on actions as needed, as we see fit, based on our local epidemiology and our local circumstances, and that's exactly what we did. So you've seen that I have issued strong recommendations, instructions, and indeed gone to using my authorities under the Health Protection and Promotion Act, given the circumstances as we see them here in Toronto and what we felt was necessary in order to best control the risk. So if that's what's warranted, we'll do that, but certainly there's advantage from a provincial level for action to be taken there as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes today's briefing. We'll be back here again on Wednesday, November the 18th. Be safe.
We have honored them ever since at cenotaphs and places of worship, in legion halls and the halls of power. They and all our veterans remind us that great things can be accomplished through cooperation and sacrifice, and that prosperity and stability.
While much of the world stays home, Canada's fertilizer industry keeps working
and from within.
to ensure the food we depend on grows better and stronger. Because without fertilizer, harvests would be cut in half. The nutrients in soil must be replenished for the next harvest. To recover from this crisis, the world depends on us. We secure tomorrow's food by fertilizing crops today. To keep things growing, you can count on us. To learn more, visit us at fertilizercanada.ca/COVID-19.
other supplies we need. And this happened in a matter of months, not years. The response has been incredible and inspiring. Ontario businesses have moved fast. They innovated, they adapted. And now it's time for the government to do the same. We need to be smarter about getting those critical supplies into the hands of the frontline healthcare heroes. During the pandemic, I pushed our system. I pushed the government to move at the speed of the private sector. And we need to make sure we're spending tax dollars wisely. When your family is shopping, you go to a place, let's say like Costco, and buy groceries in bulk so you can save money. Then there's the Canadian Tire example. Canadian Tire, they stock about 50,000 products and only have about 65 people in their procurement team. Compare that to the Ontario government. Now just remember, Canadian Tire, 65 procurement officers, purchasing agents. In Ontario, you ready for this one? We have 7,000, I'm going to repeat that, 7,000 entities involved in procurement. That's unacceptable. My friends, clearly we can and must do better. So today, I'm here to announce that we are establishing Supply Ontario. This is an all-new centralized procurement agency to help us leverage our buying power and save taxpayers money. Centralizing procurement, buying in bulk, just makes sense. My friends, when the pandemic started, it became very clear that the government's procurement system was struggling to keep up. And this is something we need to address. Whether we're ordering printer paper or PPE, we can get a better price with a bulk order, and we can coordinate our procurement more strategically. And the savings are absolutely huge. As the Government of Ontario, we could save between $1 to $2 billion, with a B, $1 to $2 billion a year to start. That's $1 or $2 billion more for critical services like healthcare and education. Supply Ontario will help us deliver the best value for the people of Ontario and ensure we have a steady and quality supply of our critical products like PPE. It will also make it easier for businesses of all sizes to work with the Government of Ontario. From the mom and pop shops to larger companies, we want to purchase and promote more Ontario-made products. In fact, I'm excited to announce today we have signed a contract with Pri-Med to produce 50 million surgical masks a year over the next 5 years. Pri-Med has chosen Ontario to set up a new major medical manufacturing facility in Cambridge. So congratulations, Cambridge. This investment will create 50 new good-paying jobs. This is great news, and we're going to keep making Ontario a great place to do business. So I want to thank Pri-Med for making this important investment in Ontario. With 3M setting up a new facility in Brockville to make millions of N95 respirators and thousands of ventilators rolling off the line thanks to Linamar and O2 Medical Technologies. With these investments and with today's announcement, we are making sure that Ontario will never, ever be left at the mercy of other countries and leaders when it comes to critical supplies we need. We have moved mountains to build and secure our own critical health supplies for our frontline heroes. And as we face the worst of the second wave, these investments have never been more important. Minister Thompson, Minister Bethlenfalvy, and Minister Fedeli will share more details in a moment, but I want to quickly share some important news for small businesses. You can now apply for PPE grant today, up to $1,000 to purchase masks, gloves, physical barriers, whatever you need to keep your workers and customers safe. We're also opening applications today for the $300 million rebate program to help small businesses with costs associated with property taxes and energy bills. This program will help those significantly impacted by modified stage 2 restrictions or control or lockdown measures. To make the application process easier for businesses, there's now a single portal to apply for all these grants. We're building a stronger, more resilient Ontario a province starting down the road to recovery in the best place in the world for businesses to invest and grow and thrive. Thank you, and God bless the people of Ontario. Now I'll hand it over to Minister Thompson.
Thank you, Premier. Pri-Med has been an invaluable partner throughout the pandemic, and I am very pleased that we are taking this partnership to the next level. Over the next 5 years, Pri-Med will produce 50 million of the Level 1 and Level 2 surgical masks we need to combat COVID-19. This will happen in a brand new facility that, when fully operational, will employ upwards of 250 people producing surgical masks and N95 respirators. This is incredible news for Cambridge and Southern Ontario. Although this partnership demonstrates real progress in improving our ability to become self-sufficient in the production of PPE, the experience of sourcing PPE and other critical supplies during the first wave of the pandemic shone a light on the crack in the supply chain system in the province of Ontario. Until now, over 7,000 public sector entities have been responsible for their own procurement, getting neither the best price for taxpayers nor, as we have learned, guaranteed access to critical supplies when we need them. The Premier has said time and again, we should never need to rely on another jurisdiction to keep Ontarians safe. With Supply Ontario, we will never have to. We will transition from buying piecemeal to buying as one. Supply Ontario will lead procurement for the entire Ontario Public Service, broader public sector, as well as the health sector. It will increase Ontario's buying power and deliver better value to taxpayers. All the while, it will also provide central oversight of our inventory to ensure that we always have the supplies we need when we need them in order to keep our province safe and secure. Supply Ontario is a made-in-Ontario solution that will support greater domestic production as well as drive job creation and economic growth. The new agency will open up opportunities for Ontario manufacturers and innovators to bid for projects to supply our province as they answer the Premier's call during the pandemic. This agency will revolutionize the way the Government of Ontario approaches supply management. Supply Ontario will make us more efficient and cost-effective, which will benefit all individuals, families, and businesses. I firmly believe Supply Ontario is a true win for this province, and it gives me great confidence in our strength and resilience as we look towards recovery. I will now turn things over to my colleague, Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy.
Well, thank you, Minister Thompson, and thank you, Premier. And good afternoon, everyone. Last month, Premier Ford and I launched Ontario Onwards, Ontario's COVID-19 action plan for a people-focused government. This groundbreaking plan will improve the way people and businesses interact with government, saving them time while making government operations more efficient, with the ultimate goal of providing more convenient, more reliable, and more accessible programs and services. Today, we're here to launch one of Ontario Onward's signature projects, the establishment of Supply Ontario. This centralized, streamlined supply chain agency will leverage the immense bulk buying power of our province and deliver greater value for taxpayer dollars. Aujourd'hui, nous lançons l'un des projets phares de notre plan d'action, Faire progresser l'Ontario, l'établissement d'approvisionnement Ontario. Cet organisme centralisé et rationalisé de la chaîne d'approvisionnement permettra de tirer parti de l'immense pouvoir d'achat en gros de notre province et de mieux utiliser l'argent des contribuables. It's a vital step forward in our plan to meet the needs of the public today, which means bringing government into the 21st century. We're seizing this moment to deliver government programs and services with unprecedented speed and convenience. Because in the midst of a global pandemic, one thing is for certain: the world has changed and government must change with it. Thank you. I'll now invite Minister Fedeli to say a few words.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Premier and our ministers. PrimeEd is a great example of an Ontario company that stepped up and demonstrated the best of the Ontario spirit in the fight against COVID-19. They are part of an innovation and technology ecosystem that will make the solutions of tomorrow a reality today. That is why the Ontario Made program is so important. Just a few short months ago, we teamed up with the Canadian manufacturers and exporters to launch the Ontario Made program. We unveiled the Ontario Made label and put the call out to our world-class manufacturers to get involved in the program. And to have PrimeEd join Ontario Made and use the Ontario Made label is indeed a credit to this program. Through Supply Ontario and the ongoing work of the Ontario Together program, we will further encourage domestic production for the goods we buy, creating good jobs and growing our economy right here at home. It will create greater opportunities for Ontario businesses to bid for Ontario government projects. Ontario small businesses and innovators will have the opportunity to help solve targeted challenges, and there will be a focus on ensuring greater economic benefits for our own families from Supply Ontario. Our government will continue to create the conditions necessary for a competitive and attractive business climate and removing unnecessary red tape so that Ontario companies can do what they do best: innovate, invest, and grow. Thank you.
We'll go to the phone line for questions. First question, please.
Your first question comes from Laura Stone with the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Premier. There's a growing call for transparency over how your government makes decisions and who it listens to. The Toronto Board of Health today said it wants the government to release all the advice given to Dr. Williams and to your cabinet from the public health measures table and other tables. We've heard about public health staff having to sign NDAs to participate in this. So you've said you've been transparent. You said the public will see everything you see. Yep. Are you prepared to make all of this advice public? And if not, why not?
Yeah. Well, Laura, I don't know of any other government across Canada that's been more transparent. It's unprecedented transparency. What I know, people find out, and they find out at 1 o'clock every single day when I'm out there. We're one of the first provinces, I think us in BC, that showed modeling and dashboard. Anyone can go online, see where the ICU beds are, where the capacity of the hospitals are. They can run through the whole gamut. And I'm going to continue being transparent, because I took the belief right from the beginning of this pandemic, and I told our cabinet, our caucus, I said anything that we know, we're coming out there in a day or the next day, and we're going to be transparent and tell the people. And a very simple philosophy: we're all in this together. I can't get through this by myself. I can't get through it with just our government. We need the people's buy-in. Without the people's buy-in, without businesses' buy-in, we aren't going to get through it. But thank God, the people have bought in and became Team Ontario. The companies became Team Ontario, Ontario-made products. We've all stuck together, and that's how we're going to get through this. But I'll continue being transparent on anything I know.
Follow up?
Premier, with all due respect, the public had no idea that Public Health Ontario had recommended thresholds 4 times lower than what your government initially proposed until it was revealed in the Toronto Star. So there's a missing piece here to do with accountability about who in your government recommended the 10% threshold in the red zone. Was it Dr. Williams? Was it you? Was it cabinet? Or was it both?
While much
and
of the
please
world
don't say
stays
it's
home,
just some amorphous
Canada's
group of
fertilizer
experts.
industry
Can you
keeps
answer
working.
clearly who
To ensure the food we depend on grows better and stronger. Because without fertilizer, harvests would be cut in half. The nutrients in soil must be replenished for the next harvest. While much of the world stays home, Canada's fertilizer industry keeps working. To ensure the food we depend on grows better and stronger. because without fertilizer, harvests would be cut in half. The nutrients in soil must be replenished for the next harvest. To recover from this crisis, the world depends on us. We secure tomorrow's food by fertilizing crops today. To keep things growing, you can count on us. To learn more, visit us at fertilizercanada.ca/COVID-19.
A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. So, he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusions. By thoughts, I mean specifically chatter in the skull, perpetual and compulsive repetition of words, of reckoning and calculating. I'm not saying that thinking is bad. Like everything else, is useful in moderation. A good servant, but a bad master. And all so-called civilized peoples have increasingly become crazy and self-destructive because through excessive thinking they have lost touch with reality. That's to say, we confuse science with the real world. This is the beginning of meditation. Most of us would have rather money than